Hello, everyone. The title of today's episode is titled, excuse me. The title of today's episode is When Society Bleeds Truth. And when Mr. Within says society, I am speaking about the advancement of civilization up to this current moment. All those listening in this moment to this talk, if you're alive, then you're responsible for your species' direction. If you're not alive, then my words will have no meaning for you, whether you're breathing or not. So what I'm communicating about is that when I say society bleeds truth, that means I am seeing certain aspects of civilization that can be made more efficient. That means when I open my eyes in the day, to some degree I've learned to, in some sense, take off those goggles, but when I look at the world, I see many things that can be more efficient simply because people can communicate a new structure of tolerance, in regards to different activities. And in some sense, when we see society, it's as if first it was physical freedom was crucial. We went through slavery, we went through war. Now we're at a point where we are still fighting over mental freedom. And mental freedom means the words we can use, because the words we use in some sense refer to the images behind our eyes that in some sense come into agreement as a common reality with others. So what I'm saying to you is that society bleeds truth when the exploration to comprehend one's true nature is in some sense either restricted, inhibited, or not allowed. So what Mr. Within is saying, and some people may say I am being careless with these words, and some people may say now is the only time I can say them, but I will say it. This world is in not a culture shock, not in a shock of different cultures trying to integrate and comprehend one another. But the world is the presence of reality through many eyes. You see, the reason I started this Mr. Within talk thing is because like as a kid, just growing up and entering society, I began to see more disharmony. This disharmony wasn't something that I couldn't bear. Like, definitely I could just live in the wilderness of the concrete jungle. But for me, it was, in some sense, a reasoning that I could not understand. That why was the world so desire bound? That means we are becoming creatures once there's a certain physical freedom achieved, a certain mental freedom. By mental freedom, I mean you can think anything, and by that nature, you can do anything. Now, there comes a moment where we have to wonder how billions of people on a giant rock are going to try to live in a better way. That's pretty much the global situation. Now the problem is that it's like a friend of mine was asking me how, like, we were talking about origin stories, because whether people know it or not, let me tell you what knowledge is. Knowledge is trying to figure out what is happening. But what is happening has such vastness and complexity that the ancient Greek philosophers, and one such as Socrates, he has this very fascinating quote that travels to our ears from ancient times. He says the only true wisdom is to know that you know nothing. Now, when I heard this quote, a part of me felt as if, like, in my mind, I am marching back into the historic school of Athens, and I'm finding Socrates, and I am asking him, why, Socrates? Why? Why do you say that the only true wisdom is to know nothing in a world where everything is in front of us and we just have to go do things? And Socrates may respond that if you take a lantern to a forest at night, you will begin to notice that you are lighting more of the forest, as if life is this vast unknown spectrum where our daily living activity is an exploration of and a comprehension of. And in some sense, the alignment of your thought is very crucial. There was a point in my life where I felt like, oh man, I need to live like a robot to succeed in a robotic world. But there were times where I, in some sense, was just alone in nature because I just had this habit of going on walks in parks in nature, And so I would find a rock in the middle of a stream that, in some sense, how would I say to you, like, I would sit in a way on the rock where the river is coming from behind me and moving past me, so I'm seeing the river go forward. You see, and in some sense, I was seeing life in some sense happen as a collective, intelligent presentation of reality. If I can say that. You see, it's very interesting, the notion, because I have realized many of when we wake up, most of our activities throughout the day are external bound. And so we find people in society where it's been, I find this silly, but it's okay to disagree with me. But what I'm saying is that I have noticed that in society, performance gets honored over vision. What that means is we exist to be a part of the story of our civilization and to be certain pillars of existence, of maintaining certain realities by our attention until we, in some sense, exit the physical door, And so what I mean by this, in some sense, is that, how can I say this? Pretty much each time I give these talks, there is this immense urge to ask every living creature on this planet, what if there was a unified vision, not bound to story, not bound to language and certain ways where people have been raised. I am speaking that we must forget stories of our own making and in some sense directly observe nature. When we directly observe nature, we realize we are creating our own relationship with it and it's in our head. But what is the experiential value of all the stories of ourselves we have told ourselves? I've gone in mentalities where at the time it felt brilliant, but later on I was like, that's hilarious, And so that mentality was like, I came across on YouTube these law of attraction kind of people, and I don't even know their names that well, but like the idea was like you repeat an idea to yourself so much that it happens. For me, it felt like you get a hammer and bang it on your head until you see something different. For me, it didn't have a natural element. Nature is not a forced grab. Many people in this life, I see it everywhere. I have seen it in the classes of this world where the so-called most brightest minds walk in, and I have seen it on the streets. I've seen it in the wilderness in animal life, and I have seen how we have potentially evolved from an animal where violence has to do with our identity. Most people are violent because something in their world has been rejected. Because it has been rejected, they think it's the world's fault. They think their internal issue is an external problem, so they think it has an external solution, and they go to war with a world that doesn't even know a war is happening. That's violence happening in a peaceful place. So let me tell you, for me, I respect every culture that has in some sense communicated a certain peacefulness. And so there should be this code of morality in regards to considering certain concepts, that if the story that is significant between atheists and theists speak about the nature of existence and wondering what it is, just to realize that we are ants on a hill beyond our eyes. So you see, the situation is very complex because the world is functioning through stories, and it functions through stories and number. And the reason I say this is because it is in some sense a mathematical language that is administering the different values of a certain aspect of our lives, especially revolved to our economies. So what I'm telling you is that there's this fantastic story which somebody told me it is true. I'm not sure, but I feel like sharing it because it could have some kind of like indirect value to what I'm saying. So here's the story. You know, somebody, I'll tell you who I heard it from. I actually heard this from Terence McKenna, who seems to me a very wise scholar of plant life, and not just a physical relationship with plants and shamanism, but a relationship with the natural world. That means you are not, in some sense, like a shaman for me is not a doctor that's not just in front of a counter at Shoppers Drug Mart. For me, a shaman, the concept was one who is in some sense an avatar of the natural world. What that means is you're not an avatar of a god. You're not masking yourselves to your true self with an idea that you think you are or are not. You see what I mean? That's the issue with affirmations that I've seen people do, and I see a lot. Like, I was shocked. I went to this gathering of close friends, and so there were some new people there, and I spoke to those new people, and in some sense I was shocked that the first things they came to tell me is that they're psychiatric issues. It was just ridiculous. As if I went to a party and just like I talked to somebody and suddenly they were telling me their issue. And at that, I'll be honest, I was a bit buzzed, and other influences of other sorts of air were involved as well. But I'm I'm telling you, for me in that moment, there was like as if I felt humanity had failed, because these friends, they're very good and smart and wise people, but at the same time, the way they're communicating themselves to others is as if they have a problem that cannot have a solution. So they're owning the problem. They're choosing to wear the problem proudly rather than to wear the solution proudly. So you see, but the issue is that nature goes at its own speed, and that's what I realized in life, because my desire, like in my mind, I was living so ahead of my time that I desired like a better future, so I wasn't paying attention to my present. But my speed of thought and my speed of existence was based on my present moment. So what I'm telling you is that we can simulate moments of time, and especially those who have a certain directorial mind in regards to the world of film. That means you can see a scene, but you can also see where the scene is being taken, and you can also see who is looking through the scene, and that there's an administration of at least a gaze of intelligence on the universe to keep it alive, as if that ant on the hill is not an ant until you see it or you ever see it. That is the suggestion, that in some sense the world is so vast that our imagination reaches to shape it, to sculpt it, but there is in some sense an incapability. That is why the world must be tolerant and flexible in its views, and to maintain a healthy society. So what's going to probably happen is that there's going to be culture wars as the world globalizes. This is a pretty rational idea. Now what's going to happen is I find that there needs to emerge a global community, a global culture, where the rules and the ethical principles of this act of civilization is to create a community of universally gazing beings. What that means is that you have a universal perspective, so instantly the realm of language that has defined you is rendered void. You see, there's two ways you can, in some sense, self-realize, as the ancient yogis in Vedic times would say. You see, they would actually say there's one, but Mr. Within is kind of like hearing me like, okay, you can't. It's like a tunnel. So there's two exits to the truth. Do you see what I mean? And you're in this middle of this self-conceived tunnel of duality. And duality simply means that the world is divided between opposites. This does create beauty. Like you need chaos in order to have. You need the dance of chaos and the dance of order together to, in some sense, realize difference in value, difference in it's a notion of beauty, that it's not just all a straight line. That's the issue with scientists, and not scientists, I want to say, let me say, like militant atheists and militant religious people. That's a better way of saying that. The issue is that they are being extreme about some idea, whatever it is. Now, one can make the argument that religion's done a lot of bad stuff, so we gotta punish religion like it's been mentally punishing us. That is in some sense the atheistic values, I believe. But I find that the theistic value says that, dude, like, we've been following this mentality, my whole lineage and ancestry's been following it. You want me to forget this in a moment and be like, oh no, it's a bad idea? It's like, it's something that's been preserved. It's an action of keeping a text in history alive in the minds of people. You see? But the text, it seeks a freedom. You see, so many things in life make you avoid freedom, and freedom is an updating method. The only time, like, sometimes how can I tell you this? Imagine all the thoughts you've ever had to this moment is your operating system. Now ask yourself, how does this operating system update itself? So this operating system updates through a new perception of the same old stuff. That's what life has been for me. I saw the archetypes of civilization and society early on, and because I saw it early on, it was just like people were being different forms of like the same pattern of a person. That means my mind was beginning to categorize the world into a way that it could relate to be able in. So what I'm telling you is that their genius requires an effort. It has always required an effort. There's no genius contribution made to the world. And if it is a fluke, then it is in some sense meant to be nameless, the genius contribution. What I mean by this is that I sought, like, I literally went after this concept of enlightenment to an extreme degree. And in doing so, I had to raise my awareness of what had happened in history and what had happened in philosophy, which is the development of the deepest thoughts of mankind. That's what philosophy is. Philosophy is like the last educational stronghold keeping the study of the unknown alive. You see, we gotta think like this. If every human being on the planet had their like food problems met, had their health problems met, had their like financial problems, everything was met, like you lived in a perfect life. Imagine 8 billion beings just living perfectly. After some point you'd be like, okay, let's create something new. That mentality of wanting to bring in something new that can integrate with society and influence its direction to a more experiential mode of a self-inquiry rather than a conceptual mode of self-inquiry. You see, the world is kept by language, but our relationship with our language is our own. How we have opened the dictionary to comprehend words. I want to share a very interesting Zen story. It is a Zen story where it includes two monks that are walking, And one of these monks is a junior monk. He's new to monk school. And then there's a senior monk, someone who's been there a long time, And so they're walking, both of them. And so these monks have a certain code of ethics where they need to abide by, where in some sense, like, they're not meant to like touch women. They're not meant to disturb things, kill animals. And it's like a vow. Monks take vows to become monks. In some sense, they're very complex human beings seeking a simple truth. So in some sense, the junior monk and the senior monk are walking, and the junior monk is new to the whole thing, and he's trying to act like exactly the senior monk, trying to copy his movement. He still hasn't found himself, so he's trying to be like somebody else, this junior monk. And so as these two monks are walking, suddenly they come across this very attractive woman who needs to get past this streams like that's blocking like her way to get to her place, like the other side of the street or something. So she's there with her bags and stuff, and she needs some kind of assistance, right? And so the young kid sees this ahead, thinking that he's more alert and wise than this old monk beside him, and the monk's not really old, but older than the kid. So what I'm telling you is that the kid says there's no way we can help her. We're monks. We can't touch women. She obviously needs somebody to help her cross the stream. So to the shock of this junior monk, the senior monk has already walked to the girl, picked her up, and put her to the other side. And the girl thanks her, and the monk blesses her, and then they walk. And so the junior monk just tries to wipe his eyes for a second because he can't believe what he has witnessed. This senior monk just broke the code. He just broke the monk code, and he's a senior monk, right? And so the junior monk quickly catches up to the senior monk but doesn't say anything, and they walk quietly. After 20 minutes, the junior monk looks at the senior monk and says, "Sir, how could you carry that woman across the stream? We're not allowed to touch women. You were touching it. How are you a senior monk?" And so the senior monk looks at the junior monk who has asked this, and in some sense, it's very profound because he's looking at himself, the younger version of himself, the senior monk. And he says to the junior monk, "I carried her across the stream and I left her there. But you are still carrying her in your mind." And so this is where the kid understands, oh my God, I thought it was like a blind, strict rule to follow, but in actuality, it is this idea that the senior monk picked up the woman in that moment, put her on the other side, and then came back and didn't think about it anymore. He just went about his day. But the junior monk kept that thought in his mind for 20 minutes. And the senior monk turns around to the junior and pretty much says, like, "You've been thinking about that girl for 20 minutes. I just put her there. It was an action of nature." Do you see? And so this is very profound because Zen stories give us insight into the nature of certain sincere human beings who sought truth. Do you see? Or the process of them becoming sincere. So in some sense, the thought was being carried. And because the thought was being carried, the present moment was being denied awareness. Right? So it's in some sense like sometimes thoughts and beliefs, too firm of beliefs, they become buckets on your head, and you walk in society and you think you're seeing everything, but you're only seeing the little plastic part of the bucket and the little bit of light that shows. I know this because when I was a kid, like really young, when I was 7 or something, there was like a bucket in the shower. So it was one of those plastic kind of buckets. So I would put my head inside to see how it looks. Do you see how light looks from it in there? I was like pretty young, maybe like before the age of 7 or something. But anyways, the whole notion was this, right? So that the idea was not being carried, therefore the perspective of the human being could change as it journeys from moment to moment, rather than have a whole day thinking of the past but living a new day. It's not a new day if you're stuck in the past. That's the honest truth. And so the past does strike us. I saw a friend recently, actually, and a friend of his had just died. This girl he knew had just taken her own life, and it was a very, in some sense, the vibe of that gathering party I was at kind of became very dark suddenly. And then in some sense I understood that life has a serious part to it always, but in some sense how we understand it. And I only went up and said to that kid one thing because it wasn't my place to talk. That kid who just saw the news that one of his closest friends, she had died. In some sense, I went up to him and I said, "Imagine if your friend was alive. How would she like you to be living?" And honor that, And in some sense, there was a whole moment of silence, and some people were even signaling me not to say anything. But when I said that, the man in some sense became calm. Of course, it was an intense thing throughout the night. There were certain breakdowns of his psychology, as if like he was in a place where people were trying to make him feel better. But at the same time, the loss was constantly settling in. Do you see? And so this loss is intense because I remember, like, I'll tell you a bit of a story. I'll tell you a bit of a story of my life in some sense. At the age of 10, I was in Iran, in the country of Iran, and I had recently come back from not recently, but it was like I think I was visiting Iran at that moment, or it was a very complex situation. But anyways, I was in Iran, right, and I hadn't been there often, So in some sense, my grandfather suddenly passes away, and I never had a chance to talk to this man. Like I saw him, we hugged, he would, and in Iranian culture, grandparents bless like the grandkids, religiously, so there was blessings like that, in some sense. But when he died, it's as if there were suddenly a shock, right? There was a sudden shock, right? And how I knew this is because me and my brother at that age we had a nanny or something, and then she just hears some news and she sits silently on the staircase, disturbed, and me and my brother instantly notice this, and we in a sense say what happened, and she says like your grandfather died, right? And so in that moment it was very intense. It was very intense because there was the first, like my mind, the images I had of him felt as if like they were now rare relics. Do you know? And at the same time, I felt like like this being, because I acknowledged when I was younger, very like pretty much my whole life I've acknowledged souls, but I'm not traditionally, not per se in a traditional way, as I've taken laps around the sun. So what I'm telling you is that there came levels of internal shock where it's as if we don't understand, but the more time we spend with any person you spend time with, your mind begins validating your reality by acknowledging their personality. So you're in some sense like how scientists speak of parallel realities, creating as many parallel realities if you have moments with a person, and it's all being there in your memory. Most people don't access it in the way I'm saying, and the way I'm saying it's not access like a file cabinet. Your memory is like, it's like a moving river. Do you see what I mean? You can sometimes see certain things, thoughts for me, or have an orbit, and people will think this is ridiculous, but for me, thoughts are like, you know, they have a certain gravity to them. Some thoughts can be so important, they gravitate you instantly to just like your biggest question in this existence, whatever that may be. Pretty much life changes you all the time. As it does, self-awareness in some sense enters and exits many ways of looking at the world, you know and in some sense being sensitive to these will make you mindful, and especially in some sense you're open to, you know like if you're interested in, how would I say this, okay, I'll say it like this, the yogic method or the Buddhist method, of self-inquiry, you will just know that you're not your thoughts. You'll know that you're not your emotions. You are a present witness, undescribable, since it is not like who you are is not a thought in a dualistic realm. Who you are is a moment of the universe that has opened its eyes, and it can embrace all of this, not just a little part of society. My when I see, in some sense, extremely wealthy people doing nothing for the condition of the world, I feel it's as if some people have found nice caves to hide in. Because the more you are able, the greater your responsibility is. That's just life, you know? When society bleeds truth, chaos will be met with order, as order is met with chaos. Much blessings and all.